Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Jameson. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands. Welcome to my strategic board, the last one we'll have before Christmas. It is Tuesday, the 15th of December at 10 a.m. We have, as always, a very full agenda today, as you'll be able to see from our website. And so we're going to make as rapid progress as we can. We have a couple of apologies. My deputy, Wahid Salim, has been called to another meeting, so he won't be with us for the first part of the meeting. Have we any other apologies for the meeting today? No, if we haven't any others, then let's make some progress. Item 2 then, I'm not going to, well, item 1, I'm not going to say much more of the update because I think a lot of the things that we are going to say are going to be said later on. But I would just say to the Chief Constable and all your staff, well done. We had a second place nationally in the awards for being a good employer. And, you know, when I think there are hundreds, if not thousands of entries to that, and we actually came second, I am delighted with that. And well done to you and all your staff who are working with you for being such a good employer and for being recognised as such on a national basis. I'm sure you've got every reason to be very proud of that. So if we now move on to item 2, which is the notes of the last meeting, there were just 2 actions that were arising from that. Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine, do you just want to quickly cover those for us?
The actions arising have both been covered, sir. The one was a note relating to fixed penalty notices. We have that note. I will ensure that it's been circulated to members, and the other action has been completed also.
Okay. Is there any other comment about either the accuracy or any other content of that meeting? Any of the board members want to raise? No. Okay. They've been distributed beforehand, so any other items would have been raised before then. Okay. We come now on to item 3, which is the part of the meeting which we reserve for members of the public. And in the interests of democracy and openness and transparency, we encourage questions or petitions from members of the public. These are to assist me in holding the chief to account. And I think I'm right in saying I'm one of the very few, if the only, PCC that actually does this in public, allows the public in to either present a petition or to ask a question. So it's not done in most areas, but I'm very pleased that this particular strategic board we have, which I think is unique, is able to listen to these sort of things. So I think we just have one petition today from Mr. Jay Singh Sohal. Mr. Sohal, are you with us this morning?
I am indeed, yes, good morning.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the meeting. What I would like you to do, Mr. Sohal, what we do with petitions is that we allow a short explanation, firstly, of the petition by the petitioner. But I have to say to you, it's not a debate time or a question time. It is for you to present the views of the petitioners to the meeting. So can I now ask you, Mr. Sohal, if you will now present your petition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And allow me, first of all, this opportunity to thank the Chief Executive for enabling me to present this most important petition to you, the Commissioner. I'm here to represent the views of more than 5,000 local taxpayers who've signed a petition fearing the loss of their police stations and the local police presence it ensures in their already vulnerable communities. And having seen the axe hovering above their police stations while crime continues to rise, they and many more want an answer to this crucial question from the PCC. Not political point scoring, nor a history lesson, nor excuses or passing the buck to someone else, but a firm and direct response. They want to know, as record government investment goes into increasing the number of police officers and with a police budget of more than £600 million, and indeed now with a £10 million budget underspend, will the PCC stop his controversial programme of police station closures? It's a simple question to which thousands of residents deserve a response from the PCC, who I note in his first reaction to this took to the press to call police stations a waste. This is not how these community assets are viewed locally in places ranging from Aldridge to Solihull, Sutton Coldfield to Tipton by taxpayers whose precepts the PCC keeps raising. And finally, fellow petitioners and I were also quite surprised to see that our submission to the Commissioner found itself in the hands of his deputy, featuring in a political video he recorded an immoral use of a public petition. So I asked the Commissioner whether it is a conduct worthy of his high office for a petition given to him in trust on behalf of thousands of people to be abused in this way. What reassurance will he now give that people's data has not been breached and is being kept securely and not being used for political purposes? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Sohal. The first question, you could just clarify something. Have we received all the petition papers from you? Can you hear me, Mr. Sohal? Have we received all the petition papers from you?
Yes, you've had more than 5,000 petitions.
Okay, thank you. Because I saw a piece of video, it brought to my attention when you were bringing in a number of box files into Lloyd House. I think about 5 of them, the ones that are behind me now. Were there other petitions in there, or were those box files empty?
Those box files contained the petitions, which were then put into an envelope to be COVID compliant, sealed in order to protect people's data, and handed into your office.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Sell, because all we received was a small envelope that would have tucked in somebody's back pocket. But that's very, very helpful of you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, on the estates programme, it is for the Chief Constable to decide how he deploys his officers into which stations. That is part of his operational independence, that he does that. And once the building has been vacated or partly vacated, it is then my responsibility as PCC to make decisions on behalf of the taxpayer as to how that building is handled from there on in. So what I'll now do is ask the Chief Constable not to respond to the latter parts of your comments, but to we'll stick to the petition for now, the issues that you raised in petition about the closure of the police station. So Chief Constable, could I ask you just to respond, please?
So thank you very much for the petition, which we always look at and take seriously in terms of those. Police buildings are always a matter of political and community interest, and we always recognise that. West Midlands Police does value locally based teams and the provision of public contact facilities as part of our neighbourhood policing offer. We have had to change our estate to reflect the economic reality policing faces, a more digitally capable police service, and the need for different capabilities for the force as times have changed. And as such, the estate is always under review by the force to match our policing needs. We've invested heavily in modern estate capabilities, such as our large and safe custody facilities, and very shortly we'll be opening the new integrated command suite in Aston to police modern complex policing operations, including the Commonwealth Games. And of course, we also aspire to work on areas where it is appropriate to make investments in local policings, and we do aspire for a new police building in Dudley. As we relocate police officers from sites, we always look where we base local teams very carefully, and we have some excellent examples of co-location with fire and with our local authorities. And we do not intend to change the parts where the force offers public inquiry offices if indeed there are changes made to the buildings in due course. So thank you very much for the petition. We will look at that, but that underpins the logic behind our current estate structure.
Thank you.
We've lost your audio feed, I think, Commissioner.
Okay, is that okay? Is that better? I think so thank you very much, Chief Constable. As I was saying just a moment ago, it is my decision now as to, once the Chief Constable has decided how he wants to deploy his officers in buildings, it's my job to decide what to do with those particular buildings. And I have to get best value for the taxpayer. That is a requirement of me under the law, although the word best value is fairly wide ranging. And keeping empty buildings open and having to maintain them and part heat them is just not a good use of taxpayers' money. Now, we have a number of stations which are now surplus to requirements. The two biggest ones of Sutton Coldfield and Solihull are about 10% occupied, 90% unoccupied now. And, you know, I've got a choice now, a difficult choice, and being in office is dealing with difficult choices. And the difficult choice is, do we maintain a lot of empty buildings, or do we provide more police officers? And my decision has been that we should have more police officers rather than empty buildings. Empty buildings do not keep people safe. Now, also since 2010, we've lost over 2,000 officers. We've lost a large number of the staff who work in support of the officers, the people in contact forensics and various other things that people do who are not in uniform. And we just, frankly, just do not need as much space as we did previously. So it makes good sense to rationalise the estate. We're also working in a much more modern way, as the Chief Constable alluded to, that where police officers can do much more now whilst they're out on the streets rather than being in police stations. I think the age of Dixon of Dock Green is well and truly closed. We're in the criminals are in the 21st century. The police force has to be likewise. Could I just come back to the issue of the empty boxes, Mr. Soha? I mean, it was clearly to give the impression that there were rather more petitions than there were. And in fact, we received a small envelope in the end with those petitions in. And I would just say to you, the PCC role does require a high degree of honesty and integrity. And I wonder if giving the impression with those empty boxes, what you did fell rather short of that honesty and integrity that would be required. Can I also say to you as well that at the moment, you'll be well aware in public buildings that we're expected to wear masks. I viewed some of the piece of video that you showed. You were shown not to be wearing a mask when you entered the building. Could I just say to you, if ever you're in doubt, always check beforehand. But it is for the safety of everybody and a matter of courtesy that you follow what we're doing in the building. And you probably notice that the people around you were entering the building about the same time were largely wearing masks. The one that you could see were wearing masks. So for the safety of everybody, can you just make sure that if you call again, that you are wearing the appropriate mask? Now, you're also, in your lead up in your the video, you did cover the issue of Lloyd House. So when you delivered the petition, you talked about the £34 million or thereabouts for the refurbishment. Now, I have to say, I would like to be able to claim all the bouquets for the wonderful work that's been done on Lloyd House, but of course I can't claim that because the decisions were made by others well before my time. If I just run through some of the benefits, the Lloyd House, as it was before, I wasn't terribly familiar with the building, but I understand it was in poor condition. Structurally, it was very sound, but the inside of the building needed a lot of repair from the time it was first deployed. With the work that was done to Lloyd House, instead of 700 people, it takes nearly 1,400 people now are capable of working in that. And of course, we opened a police station actually in Lloyd House as well. So increased capacity, but also several very expensive offices that we were renting in the city centre could then be closed. And that would be to the benefit. We wouldn't be spending all that money on those buildings. We cut the heating costs and maintenance bills because we'd done the work. And frankly, we were able to work into 21st century technology, whereas the other building wasn't allowing us to do that. Now, what we heard at the time, you may see one of our board papers going back a while. It showed that in just over 7 years, the building would, as the expression goes, wash its face. In other words, it would then be saving us money rather than costing us money. We're 4 years into that. In 3 years' time, in 2023, whosoever takes over this job from me will then be seeing the benefits of Lloyd House and the work that we did. Now, I'd like just to clarify the position of who decided this, and I shouldn't be taking all the credit for that wonderful work we did, including, of course, providing jobs for the building companies who did it and apprenticeships during the time it was built as well. All those things were benefits, but the actual building was it was decided, discussed by the police authority before 2012. And when my colleague Bob Jones, the late Bob Jones, came in, he formally made the decision. The vice chair at that time was, I'm sure somebody that he's familiar with, one of his party colleagues, is Councillor Diana Hall Allen. She was actually vice chair of the police authority when decisions were made about Lloyd House. And she visited Lloyd House when we did the official opening. And she said, this is an excellent modern building that will enable officers and staff to work more efficiently and effectively. It will save West Midlands Police money, enable the force to invest money into the front line to protect officer numbers. We had on that occasion with us, it was the a senior minister of the government, Mr. Nick Hurd, and he said at the time, office and staff in the West Midlands do an excellent job keeping our community safe, and this refurbishment will not only save money, but will also mean that they will have improved working environment to carry out their vital duties. So you can see the work, as a good decision was made by a cross-party group of councillors at that time, and I do applaud them for their decision. And if you, in the future, Mr. Sohail, if you want to give any plaudits out for Lloyd House, I'm sure you'll want to give the credit to where it's actually due. If I could just turn to a couple of the police buildings that you mentioned. We've got Sutton Coalfield was the one that you mentioned. Now, this is a truly enormous building built in the mid 20th century in a different time for a different reason for a different police force that we had at that time. And it's only about 10% occupied. And we have been looking, I'm sure you know, for a joint venture with the government. We've written to Michael Gove. Will he look to bring a government department into it to join us in Lloyd House? That would mean that the police station could stay exactly where it is, and that we could also bring work, employment and footfall into the centre of Sutton Coalfield, which is very much needed. Now, we've not heard from Mr. Michael Gove over 2 months, but I think he's quite occupied on other matters at the moment. Mr. Searle, you may want to have a look as well at Sutton Coalfield, the Royal Sutton Coalfield Town Council meeting about 3 years ago, when they looked at the plan, the structure plan for Sutton, and they were very enthusiastic about their relief road. And very, very good thing too. It'll take the pressure off the town centre. I'm quite familiar with that because my first teaching job was in Sutton Coalfield, just off Sutton Coalfield Town Centre. But if you look at the minutes of their meeting, you'll see that they gave it the nod of approval. But also, if you look at the plan, you will see the relief road actually goes through the land that's occupied by the police station. So you may want to go back to the town council and have some discussions with them about this, because they clearly want their relief road, but it does look as if the police station would have difficulty surviving the building works that are going on. I could turn to Solihull Police Station. Again, this is a huge building, and again, structurally sound, but old-fashioned, and is only 10% to 15% occupied at the present moment. And again, we have explored the idea of using this alternative by another user. But I'm just wondering, Mr. Sohail, if you've looked at the detailed work that you have done on the estates programme, if you have looked at the Solihull Town Centre Master Plan that came out about 5 weeks ago at the beginning of November 2020, went before the Cabinet of Solihull Council. And in that master plan, they've got very exciting, innovative, forward thinking by some of your party colleagues in developing Solihull Town Centre, and I very much applaud that. And you'll see the structure plan is I have it here. This is the actual structure plan. You may want to have a glance at that. But if I could just take you into the plan, on page 2 of the plan, there's showing some of the development that's going to happen in the town centre. One of the zones there is the area where the police station currently is. And if I can show you some detail of the main plan, it's page 25, but I think in the small booklet form, it's page 49. You can see here the plan of the purple part. The purple part there in the plan is actually the site where the police station currently is. Now you can see there's a building actually cited in this master plan where the police station is. Now, not only have the master plan determined that the police station should go, but they've also designed a building that actually go on it, and they've shown it in the master plan. Now, I just say to you, Mr. Sowell, while you were collecting signatures on a petition to save the police station, your colleagues on Solihull Council were planning to close it and publish a plan just 5 weeks ago. And again, this might be an issue that you want to take up with them. I have written to the leader of the council about 4 weeks ago. I have not yet had a response from the leader, Councillor Ian Courts. I have said categorically there will be a police station in the centre of Solihull, regardless of his plan. And I've asked him to come back to me to let me know what alternative he has to provide a police station, because the master plan shows no police station at all in the centre of Solihull. So it does look as if it is his colleagues he needs to go and talk to, and he may want to join me in my campaign to keep the police station presence in the centre of Solihull against what appears to be the ambitions of the council to actually build on it and put flats or offices on that site. Now, Mr. Sowell, you may or may not wish, in the light of the information facts that you've just received, you may want to withdraw your petition. We don't have a procedure for it, but I'm sure we can find a way of your doing that. But if not, your petition will, of course, be dealt with in the usual way. But you can see now from the clarity that I hope that I presented for you, there are a number of inaccuracies in what you've said and your petition, and what you've said has been very misleading to the public. And when you're making assertions on important matters that affect the safety of the public, I think I said it to one of your colleagues from Sutton Coldfield when she came to our meeting before, and I used to say to my pupils in Sutton Coldfield is, do your homework first. And can I suggest to you, Mr. Sowell, before you progress any further ideas about the estates programme, do come and talk to us. You've had an invitation to come and meet with us to get an expert briefing on what we're doing. As I'm aware at the moment, I think you're the only potential candidate who has not made a positive response to that. However, if you do make a positive response, of course, my office will be delighted to talk to you and perhaps give you some better information. But Mr. Sowell, thank you very much for attending. I hope you found that helpful, and you may want to stay for the rest of the meeting because you'll find, again, some very useful information about the work we're doing, and it may assist you in your campaign. Thank you indeed very much. Now, we have a lot of important things to deal with in this meeting, so let's now make some progress. And I move now on to item 4, which is questions from members of the board. And we have 3 questions today, the first of which is from Brendan Connor. Brendan, would you like to ask your first question, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to ask the Chief Constable if he could comment on the situation on firearms use trend following the recent 3 firearms discharges. Can the Chief Constable give any public reassurance about the general trend of firearms usage in the West Midlands police area?
So thank you for the question. Our firearms discharges have fallen since 2017. 2019 we saw quite a significant reduction in firearms, and we're currently about the similar position in terms of the overall numbers of discharges year to date as we've seen in the period 2019. So the actual quantity of discharges is relatively static, and we're currently running at about 133 over the year. Those discharges, as we know, a great many of them are discharges that take place against property, cars, doors, and not people. But clearly, we also have suffered some tragic shooting issues that involve people and indeed fatalities. We take the firearms crime very seriously. We do know that these types of offences predominantly affect large urban forces, particularly the Metropolitan Police, ourselves, Manchester, West Yorkshire and Merseyside are the main areas where this type of crime is important and we address. In terms of the work we're doing, clearly that there is a considerable amount of operational activity I'll cover off, but the trend particularly, and I think it's worth mentioning those 3 discharges in one day, they were particularly unusual and concerning, and I'll come back to the operations we've been running lately around them. But what I would say is that there's a considerable amount of work we do with the Regional Organised Crime Unit, with the other 3 forces in the region, particularly to target firearms supply. And so year to date, we've recovered 136 firearms in the region, which is almost close to the entirety of what we recovered in the 2019 year, which was 138. So we may surpass the number of recoveries we've got. In terms of where we are, we have run a series of operations over the autumn and summer, and particularly this year, the volume of discharges have been actually much higher in the autumn as opposed to the summer. And I think some of this is as a result of the impact we've seen on the drugs market, particularly as a result of the lockdown, that has certainly disrupted some of the routes for supply of drugs. Certainly the reduction in opening hours of licensed premises has reduced the amount of drugs markets we may have seen in the licensed premises, but has increased pressure, I think, particularly on drug markets in streets and other areas and the tensions between gangs. We've run a series of operations across the force this year in Birmingham, in the Black Country and in Coventry in particular. Every week we do a weekly firearms meeting to drive and review the work we're doing, look at operations the force is running, look at operations we want the Regional Organised Crime Unit to do. And of course, we work incredibly hard with the National Crime Agency, who have the primary lead on supply and availability of firearms nationally. In terms of other work we will do, the National Firearms Surrender that takes place every year was cancelled because of the pandemic. We expect to carry out a local surrender in 2021 in terms of where we're going. So there is a lot of activity going on. I think my observation would be this, though. I am concerned about the firearms position because of the type and nature of some of the firearms recoveries that we have. We do work very closely with our National Crime Agency colleagues. It's one of the areas that is a national UK threat to stem the supply of types of firearms. And we have seen a shift, I think, over the last few years. People will remember on the board the operations we've run, particularly against antique firearms supplies and locally constituted and built ammunition. Those have been very successful operations, resulted in a number of people in custody. More latterly, we have seen a trend where the increasing use of shotguns or originally designed lethal purpose weapons have been used rather than antiques or converted firearms. So that availability of originally lethal purpose weapons, slightly more current than antiques, is a trend we've seen over the last few years. And that requires us to work, I think, very closely with the National Crime Agency to address the potential international supply routes around those. So a lot of work ongoing. Broadly, the level of discharges is in line with 2019. Good progress on recoveries, but the type of firearm threat has changed over that period, and that requires us to keep working very closely with the NCA on supply and availability.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask one supplementary, which is, what is your view about the recent firearms legislation? Will that bring pressure to bear on the type of firearms discharges that you've seen?
Yeah, so there is a considerable level of opportunities to tighten up on firearms legislation. You know, particularly we've pushed very hard around antiques. We've also had conversations about the ability to inspect and review. I'm not sure what specific areas you're talking about in the legislation. If you could just flag those up, that would be very helpful.
It was really just the use of antique firearms and reconverted firearms.
Yeah. So I think, as we said, we've done a lot of work around that. Obviously, I started a lot of the work on the legislation change with the Law Commission when I was the national lead for this. I think it does help because what we were seeing, and so people are clear or following, that weapons that are deemed as antiques that were not precisely defined in law, but were generally treated as firearms over 100 years, were able to be possessed as antiques without firearms licenses. The moment they are united with ammunition, they do require licensing and regulation. And the trend we'd seen was that people were beginning to start to supply these antiques without the need for anyone to have a license. And the criminals, when they had them, were then finding ways of purchasing constituent parts and creating their own ammunition, which is largely obsolete caliber ammunition. That was a very strong trend here in the West Midlands. It was mirrored across the country. And so the change in legislation were to block that issue off. And of course, we tend to think of firearms of 100 years old as being quite inadequate. Actually, if you look at them, particularly revolver firearms, they're almost as good as the current models that are available. So I think it is really helpful. And I think the tightening up of that work has worked very hard. But criminals will always seek firearms. And our challenge is, I describe it as balloon squeezing. You press down on one area and a market pops up elsewhere. And our concern is that we've seen certainly a greater use of shotguns in this region, which often are obtained through thefts in more rural areas. We're surrounded by rural areas, but also handguns and automatic style weapons remain attractive for criminals. And of course, they will look for supply routes outside the UK where they can be located. So that work we're doing with the NCA is important. You will know also we have neighbours here that we host on behalf of police forces. They are working with the government, for example, on a project in the Balkans to try and reduce the potential risk of supply into UK markets. So it is truly local to international, but the legislation certainly around antiques is something we've been pushing for quite a period of time, and we're grateful when the Law Commission supported us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Brendan. Brendan, would you now like to ask your second question?
Yes, a different end of the spectrum. How many public dashcam submissions have been made to West Midlands Police, and how many of these have resulted in prosecutions?
So thank you for the question. It's very topical. We did some media coverage this week on our police-led prosecution team because these types of offences are prosecuted by the force now, not the CPS. So we have a portal whereby the members of the public, if they go on our website, can upload dashcam footage regarding dangerous driving or other offences, and they go into our criminal justice collision file team who will look at them. Generally speaking, 80% are matters that concern driving without due care and attention. About 11% of the footage uploaded relates to red light traffic violations, 8.5% driving without proper control, 0.2% while using a mobile phone, and 0.3% the most serious offence of dangerous driving. In terms of the quantity, so far this year we've received 3,427 reports that all included dashcam footage. If I contrasted that to 2017, we received 208 that year. So the numbers and quantum are growing year on year. The growth this year has not been as great, but I think that reflects the lower car usage we've seen during the lockdown period particularly. Based on a complete financial year, we generally prosecuted about 46% of those cases. We're slightly lower at the moment this year, around 43%, and that's just slightly as a result of some of the COVID impacts, and that has created some delays, particularly around the time limit on proceedings that take place. We also will, in addition to prosecution, it's fair to say we also look at things like driver education courses as part of the work we do as well. The growth is quite considerable, and we are doing a review at the moment looking at whether we have sufficient capacity in the unit. Contrary to popular belief, actually, these don't generate huge revenue for forces. We do need to look at the costs, and actually prosecuting more of these is actually increasing force costs at the moment. And so we're going to start looking a little bit what we do to review the level of resourcing we put against this. But my general view is this has been very successful. The force has led a lot of these areas. We've put particular community initiatives out there. Particularly Operation Zigzag, which is encouraging members of the public to report some of the parking offences or obstruction offences. And we're very keen to receive these images because clearly we can't be everywhere all of the time. Dashcam footage can be incredibly useful, and we always welcome the opportunity to review it where there may be offences. But it's a good news story, but clearly an additional pressure in terms of the demands on the force.
Brendan, do you want to come
Thank you
back?
very much.
Yeah, thank you for your questions, Brendan. Thank you to Constable for the responses to those questions. Excuse me, the third question is from me, and it is, could the Chief Constable provide an indication of the number of extra officers who will be available for each neighbourhood policing unit or department of the police service from the Uplift programme?
Okay, so thank you, Commissioner. So just to recap where we are, obviously this year the government allocated 366 extra officers from the Uplift programme, which was very welcome. And the force currently plans to grow by about 1,200 officers and probably 400 or so police staff as a result of a combination of that national investment that we may get allocated, but also the work we do around efficiencies. That level of efficiencies has enabled us to grow the force by 526 officers this year. So we're actually growing by more than that Uplift programme as a result of the combination of obviously local taxation and efficiencies the force is delivering, which is important. That recruitment's going ahead really strongly. We expect to recruit 1,200 officers in total this year. And the reason for that is obviously we need to reflect those that we're replacing as well as those that we're recruiting. So, you know, a lot of recruitment going on this year. So in terms of the allocation, which is the heart of the question, it's incredibly important that we identify. People want to look at how many local officers they're getting. And clearly the force is organised in a way through its local policing areas and its departments that actually lots of officers in departments are delivering work around local policing, even if they're not always entirely based in that particular geographic area. So if I set out broadly what the allocation of officers we're assuming over the first 2 years to be, and we've assumed 2 years to avoid making too many judgments about the third and final year of the Uplift. So we're going to increase the number of police officers who work in our response policing teams by 252. That's specifically to look at the attendance times, particularly around priority 1 hour attendance calls. Our response to emergencies, I think, is good. We can still, no doubt, in all these areas make some improvements, but the priority 1 hour calls are an area that we're particularly attentive on at the moment, and those extra officers will help with that, and they will be based across the West Midlands area. Bringing offences to justice is incredibly important. We do incredibly well on priority crimes like burglary and robbery, and we do in many other areas, but we would like to improve the number of crimes we prosecute for violence, domestic abuse and rape specifically, and so 159 police officers and 123 police staff will be allocated into those areas of work streams over the next 2 years to improve the number of cases we can bring to justice. Those crimes are more complex and require more staff to support them. In terms of the neighbourhood policing areas, we already invest considerably in neighbourhood policing teams. The last time I checked, we probably have the 4th or 5th highest percentage of our officers in neighbourhood police roles of any force in the country, and actually we have the largest amount of any of the large urban forces. So there's a very strong commitment to local policing, but we still think there are more areas we'd want to invest in. So there will be 222 more neighbourhood officers, and they will be particularly allocated around proactive capability to tackle things like drug dealing and violent crime, but also we will be making and returning some school-based officers. And we're working through with our local authorities and our schools to identify priority areas, which won't just be schools, they'll also include things like pupil referral units, where it's very important that police build strong links with the view to reducing crime. We'll also be looking to invest more in organised crime. The force is doing a lot of very good work with our local authority colleagues. We work closely with the ROCU and the NCA, as I've said, but we have done some particular work, building upon the data analytics work we've got in force to develop a stronger serious and organised crime and exploitation team. And we will be investing in those teams that will tackle county lines, drugs markets, gangs and the exploitation of vulnerable people. And we expect 151 extra officers and staff to be deployed into those areas. That will probably be more heavy in the second year of the Uplift because those roles are a little bit more specialist. They're not as easy for us to fill with student officers, but we will certainly be making an investment into organised crime. In due course, there will be a slightly more detailed breakdown of the timelines those officers going to post. Clearly, at the moment, the big energy is on recruitment and making sure we tutor and skill the new officers. And certainly we're already feeling some of that benefits in numbers, but in terms of policing skill, we'll very much see that start to materialise in 2021.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Constable. I mean, this is really important to the public. I mean, just saying we're increasing police numbers doesn't mean a lot until you actually know how they're going to affect people's lives in their communities. And that's why your response there was most helpful. Could you also just reinforce that you're talking about 252 officers going into response? I mean, that is good news in that there'll be even faster response. But is it the case also that lifts some of the pressure from the neighbourhood units who occasionally get called in for some of this work? It'll actually provide an even solider base for the neighbourhood units in the area. And could you just give it just a feel as well? It's not just numbers of people. The efficiency program that we've undertaken over the last 5 years, which is probably more than any other force, certainly that I know of, that we're actually making better use of officers' time as well. Although the numbers won't change, but the actual amount of valuable time they can use on policing will increase. Could you just give a feel for that for members of the public?
Sure. So yes, I mean, I think the first thing to say about the response officers is that we I think have productive teams. We do some very good work. We deal with more of our calls for service over the phone to minimise the demand on response teams and also through electronic reporting, which is very popular with the public. But the response teams at peak times of demand, particularly on the routine 1 hour calls, are very stretched. And that does, as you say, on occasion, have a ripple out effect into other departments and functions. And we've done a lot to minimise the pressure on neighbourhood teams, I think, over the last few years. Particularly, we've grown more police staff, investigators and not police officers to take away some of that call demand, and that's helped. But unquestionably, at times of peak demand, there is a real stretch on force proactivity, and we want to keep that in place. So those extra officers will unquestionably bridge that gap that we occasionally see at certain times of the day. In terms of the ways of working, so we have obviously tried to make back office areas of the force more efficient. We've done that because we've had to make savings, and we still need to make savings because of the way our funding progresses. But where we've done over-delivered on those, we have invested that in operational roles. And so particularly this year, some of the police staff investigators that we had on temporary contracts were moving to make a more substantial and fundamental part of the force. So when I refer to the extra police staff, a lot of that has come through efficiencies the force has done by becoming more modern in the way it works. The final area is obviously the digital tools we've got. We've got probably a very advanced mobility program. What we want to do is ensure that we are enabling particularly our uniformed officers that when they leave the building to carry out patrols, they can do all their tasks away from the site. And with the implementation of Connect and more of the modernisation of the core IT systems, we'll get to that point in 2021. But we've already changed quite a lot of the way officers work, and the need to return to the police station and spend more time on tasks has been definitely assisted by the investments in technology that we've made. So we are changing the way we work as well as growing the numbers, which I think is important. And I think the package I outlined is a good spread. I know members of the public in West Midlands will be very keen to see visible policing. They're very keen to see reliable policing when they phone. They're very keen on local proactive policing. But we also need to recognise that investigations are more complex now with the amount of digital material we're dealing with. So we need to invest in investigators. And the threat of serious and organised crime is best dealt with by many capabilities the public don't see. And so it's important we don't just judge how safe we feel by seeing visible policing, by how safe we actually are, because much of that safety, I think, is delivered by policing activity that the public will never see.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief. And I'm glad you've clarified the the value of those people who work for the force and don't wear a uniform, who work in support of the force. Sometimes the pejorative term of back office is used about those people. And of course, they do highly valuable work. From answering the calls 999 101, they're doing forensics, they're doing a whole range of absolutely vital services that make sure that the uniformed officers can then do their work on the street. So thank you very much indeed for your responses to those questions. Right, we come on to item 5 now under the subheading Building a Modern Workforce, and the item 5 is the cadets and volunteers. Presented by Assistant Chief Constable Mark Payne. Could I just say, as a preface to this, that the report I understand has been put together by Sam Booth. Can I say this is one of the best reports, most positive reports I've ever seen come before this board. It sets out very clearly what we've intended to do, what the reasons are, why we're doing it, and the actual quality of the information and the readability of it is outstandingly good. And it also, through the report, I feel radiating the enthusiasm of the author and those people that she's working with for the cadets and the volunteers who are part of what we do, but a small but important part. So that's my preface to that. So shall I leave Assistant Chief Constable if you would like to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And Sam is online with us, and I will allow Sam to take you through some of the detail of the excellent work that Sam and her team have done. I suppose to start off by saying this has been a really challenging year in many regards, and both cadets and volunteers, we've been denied the use of physical meetings and physical spaces. So the team have had to overcome the challenges of COVID and have done that exceptionally well by exploring some of the opportunities that are presented in the digital space. So if I just talk about cadets, you will see that we are on course to meet the 500 target that was set. You know, I've attended a number of the cadet meetings. They are exceptional young people, and recently have taken part in an online forum where again they are participating very positively. And what has been really reassuring is that we've managed to maintain the numbers of cadets, and indeed are looking to grow and increase those numbers despite the challenges of COVID. We've also managed to increase the number of cadet leaders, which again is very positive, and you know, a really good sign for the future. And what I've asked the citizens in policing team and our local commanders to do is to focus future cadet schemes in our most difficult areas, our impact areas where we know we've got some of our most difficult to reach communities and some of our communities who are most difficult to engage. So we see cadets as a really positive opportunity to branch into areas where we might ordinarily not be able to access. So the cadet scheme next year, we've got really ambitious plans to bring, once COVID recedes, people back together in a physical place. We will take the learning though from the digital work and probably move forward using a combination of both. Our young people do tell us they like to meet physically, which is great, but we think that, you know, there are also really good opportunities online. You've got in front of you the numbers which really speak for themselves, both in terms of diversity and gender, which are very positive, and also the numbers that we will have available to us once we've got the new schemes up and running. I just want to take a second just to reassure you about some of the safeguarding issues. So some cadet schemes in different places of the country have had some challenges around safeguarding. Because of that, I have pulled together a new cadet board where we are engaging some specialists from external partners, and Sam's background has really been helpful to us here. We've got some experts who are helping us work through the youth Safer Spaces framework, which is designed to deliver the safeguarding and appropriate care for cadets in our care. So just to mitigate any potential future risk around that. I'll come on to talk about volunteers. Again, Very positive given the very challenging environment we've been in, that we've grown our volunteer numbers by over 100 in the past 12 months. That is something that I want to continue to see. But what I would like to see is growth again in those areas where we are, we have difficult communities and communities that are more difficult to reach. So that's a conversation I'm having with the neighbourhood commanders and SAM's team, where rather than increasing numbers in areas that are perhaps traditionally easier for us to get into, that we look to be more challenging of ourselves and driving into those communities who might not ordinarily want to work with policing. So I think really good opportunities next year for us to start to look at the benefits of the Commonwealth Games and the Coventry City of Culture volunteers. So we're already engaged with the leaders of both of those projects. So as people who have sort of volunteering aspirations sign up to those, that we are alongside them and maximising the potential recruitment opportunities that come out of those. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the paper. I've deliberately gone through it quickly to give you the opportunity to ask questions of either myself or Sam. Hopefully that's been helpful to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Assistant Chief Constable. That has been very helpful, and you've highlighted some of the very positive aspects of the report, which shows the work, the very positive work that we're doing. I'm really pleased that we are actually reaching into those areas, the hard to reach areas. The reason for that particularly is I know some of the really other excellent youth groups like the Scouts and Guides, which do as well a truly good job. But they do tend to focus more in the leafier areas, and the difficulty I know the Scouts have is finding volunteers to come into some of the more challenging areas of our cities, and so it's good that we are complementing the work that they are doing with the work we're doing in some of those challenging areas. So I think looking to where youth provision is the thinnest, and where there are the most potential problems with young people who remain unoccupied, I think is a good one for the future. And as well on volunteering, out there in our communities, there's a huge amount of willingness to actually engage with the police and give time voluntarily. We've seen that from the people helping the cadets, both people who are in the force and people who are outside of the force, but as well as coming in to be police specials, who I value highly. I think the police specials is probably an area where we do need to keep up the work and progress to make sure we increase those numbers as well. So is there anybody has a question or comment, please? Tom.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks for the report and loads of really positive stuff going on. And I can see in the report that it mentions engagement with Coventry City of Culture and Commonwealth Games around how you can use your kind of excellent volunteering initiatives and link it to that, particularly with you to creating Commonwealth Games legacy. So I wanted to ask, how well are those engagements and conversations progressing? And do you feel like you've got some tangible proposals now?
I'll bring Sam in to give you the detail, but I have personally spoken to Dave Sturman, who is leading on Commonwealth Games for us, and Helen Kirkman and Mike O'Hara, who are developing the City of Culture work about that specific aspect. They both are really positive that because of the nature of the people who are already starting to move towards volunteering in those projects, that there'll be some really healthy opportunities to recruit. I think, though, that actually, in terms of the Commonwealth Games, they're not quite as advanced as you would expect as a City of Culture, and they're not quite there with volunteers yet. But what we are doing is seeking to make sure that as they go out to recruitment, that we're working alongside them. So we are identifying people who have that volunteering spirit and are looking for opportunities to pull those into policing as well. But perhaps, Sam, is it worth you just elaborating on that?
Of course. There's some really strong links between the citizens in policing team and the organising teams, as indicated by ACC Payne already. And we're making sure that we're also considering how we can increase not just formal volunteering, but active citizenship within the communities that we're going to be working within the City of Culture as well. And that in itself can then lead on to some more formal volunteering in the future. So we're at the point of really exploring what all of those opportunities are, so that we don't discount anything and we're really open to all the possibilities and potential that's there.
If I could just quickly follow up. I
Yes,
don't want to say anything that's negative, because clearly there's so much good in this, but just kind of, I guess, a slight word of warning. We were kind of having similar conversations and similar statements of intent well over a year ago. And I just know how quickly time flies. And I think because Westminster Police is kind of such a leader in establishing so many different credible forms of volunteering, that this is an opportunity for us to kind of get in front of this and really set out tangible options so that it doesn't kind of end up getting dropped to a last minute.
Tom, can I'll just add on that, Commissioner, if that's okay. So I think that's a really good challenge. You know, I think we're very pleased with where we are. I think Sam's really hit the ground running, and Mark has given some real emphasis onto this. I think that if we talked about the Commonwealth Games, we've been very ambitious, I think, about how we see the role of volunteers in the security operation will carry out. And I think we can and we will do that. I think it's part of what we do. And I think you'll see more on that as we start laying out the plans. I think in terms of Commonwealth Game, City of Culture, I think that's a good challenge to us. I think I was going to talk later about the work the force is doing in support of charitable causes on the run into Christmas. And we've had we dipped our toe into volunteering hours for our own staff as well. We do that already very heavily with the cadet schemes, because of course, without the support of our own staff, we wouldn't be able to run voluntary cadet schemes, and our officers and staff don't get paid to run them. They do it as volunteers, and we try and give some volunteering hours back for that. We do have some staff doing some volunteering hours at the moment in support of causes where the public are in need at the moment. I would probably look as part of the City of Culture work to see whether we can actually expand our own ability to use our own staff for volunteering in those areas as well. So I think it's a good challenge. I think we do need to crystallise our offer around City of Culture, but certainly I'm very, very confident Commonwealth Games will have some phenomenal opportunities for volunteering in it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now I've got several other people who want to come in. If we keep brief and crisp, that'll help everybody. So Kath, will you come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mark and Sam. My question is to continue that theme of communication. So I've had a look at the online links that are in the report for recruitment, and they're not that youth friendly. So could you give us some examples of how you're doing things differently to spread the word about the cadets and volunteering, particularly within the harder to reach communities?
I'll probably ask Sam to talk about that. Sam and her team are actively engaged on a day-to-day basis doing exactly that, Kath. So Sam, do you just want to describe the sort of processes that you're adopting?
Yes, of course. So we are making good use of Twitter to make sure that people are aware of the cadet scheme. We're also going into schools directly, and we're talking to the schools where they're hosting a cadet unit and explaining the benefits to the young people that come to cadets. So we really are getting into the heart of that community and making sure that the right young people who are going to most benefit are being referred to us. In the future, we'll be exploring the use of leaflet drops so that we can really engage with young people, as well as using Twitter. Instagram is particularly popular with young people of that age group, but we're also making sure that we're engaging with the right professionals who would have access to young people who are most at risk.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Kath, does that help you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gorinda, you are to come in.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of questions from me on the cadets around paragraph 10 and 11 around the diversity. I know you're saying that you don't currently collect data on the diversity of leaders. That would be really helpful. It would also be helpful to understand the proportion of leaders that are school staff, for example, and police officers or police staff or from the community. That would be helpful to understand as well. The diversity, the figure 1, it shows 50% are non-white and of various Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, but within that there's quite a disparity within that as well. I'm just wondering whether what work you'll be doing to improve the diversity of the cadets. And then on figure 11, there's only one scheme in each of Walsall and Wolverhampton. You know, what plans have you got to improve that? On volunteers, paragraph 39, let me just find that, what was the table? There's Walsall MPU and Sandwell MPU are showing 15 and 5 volunteers in 2020 and none in 2019. I just want to understand whether that is a change of emphasis by the MPUs in utilising volunteers more now than they used to, and if so, what kind of job roles are those that they're working on? And then paragraph 41 again talks about the diversity of volunteers is not currently captured. That is important to understand that as well. If volunteers, just as we place a lot of emphasis on recruitment from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic communities into the police service generally, volunteers are just as important in that respect as well.
That's a good point. Thank you, Grinda. Good point. Mark?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Grinda. So just on the diversity mix, so I'm actually really quite pleased that the diversity is broad and largely reflective of the sort of ethnic makeup of our communities. To be honest, I think it's always a challenge, and we know that some of our communities are easier to reach into than others. It's always a challenge to get people engaged from our more difficult to reach communities. So I think the numbers are positive. Not at all complacent though, and recognise that we would want to keep increasing both the numbers of people and also maintaining the ethnic mix and improving the ethnic mix where possible. In terms of both Walsall and Wolverhampton, and actually the broader command group. So the challenge I'll be setting to the commanders over the next 12 months is to drive additional volunteering and cadet work, as I've already said, into the areas that we find most challenging, those impact areas. You would expect there to be, in my view, in the fullness of time, cadet schemes and really good volunteer networks in all of the 19 impact areas. So I'll be looking to drive increased activity, and that's a task that has been set to the local commanders. And just on the volunteer point, again, I think if it's helpful, we can feed back to the group in terms of the numbers and diversity of the leaders and where they come from. We can certainly pull that together. I doubt Sam's got that in her head, but I'll ask her just to comment at the end in case she has. And in terms of the volunteers on local policing unit, neighbourhood policing units, yeah, again, that is a challenge I've set to the commanders. So just going back to the Commissioner's earlier point, what I don't want particularly is to have lots and lots of street watch and other sort of voluntary schemes in areas that are easy to reach. I think that the real challenge is to grow voluntary workers from those more difficult areas. So the MPUs have started to do that, which is why you've seen the numbers on the scheme. I would hope and expect that when we come back for an update next time, that you would see that in a broader range of neighbourhoods, and they would reflect, as I say, that those more difficult to reach areas. Sam, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Only that I think it's really important that we do understand the diversity of our cadet leaders, and it is something that we'll be able to register and report on when we submit our next report. And that we are currently receiving far more applications externally for cadet leaders, which is really encouraging, and from a really diverse background, which I'm really encouraged by. So I think in the future, it's quite bright.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Matt. That's very encouraging. Is that okay, Grinda?
Yeah, I just forgot to say the gender balance on cadets 50-50 is spot on, and congratulations on that.
Yeah, it's good to see when you visit the cadet units that the boys and girls are equally enthusiastic about what they're doing, and that is really good news. Sarah, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to ask about engagement with the younger age group of young people, the primary school age. Are schemes such as the junior PCSO schemes still ongoing? Could you maybe update us on where we are with that?
Yes, certainly. So we are still actively engaged with our junior PCSO, and it is something that we are really enthusiastic about. So I was talking actually last week to Chief Inspector Becky Barnsley, who sort of championed this really, really strongly and has done a great job. It was something that has been, I think, quite difficult in COVID. As you can imagine, talking to heads, they have lots and lots of competing demands and are really, really careful about who they invite into their schools at the minute. But we haven't, lost the ambition. I agree with you completely. Actually, my wife is a primary school teacher who works in a difficult to reach school. She loves it when the police come in, and I know the kids do as well. So I get regular reminders at home that it's really important that our police go into our community schools, and it's something that I will be driving really strongly once we get beyond the COVID period.
Okay, Sarah.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. This has been really most positive, and can I thank you, Mark and Sam, and the many others who have been working on this as well. We're truly grateful to you, and your hundreds of volunteers are also supporting the West Midlands Police each week, and even from people like the Street Watch and the volunteers in our economic crime unit, and all those people who are just working to help keep us safe. So thank you to all those. And I really want to see this grow, the number of volunteers. And there is outside a huge willingness to volunteer. We must capture that. I think the Coventry City of Culture, as we've often talked about, is a good opportunity for this. Thousands of people will be volunteering as part of those events. And I think afterwards, as part of the legacy, we should have a legacy, not just of sports events, but a legacy of volunteering. And I think we should make sure that we are in a position to capture some of that enthusiasm that clearly lies in so many of our communities. But again, thank you both very much for the most positive report. But as you have indicated yourself, there's still a lot to do. And we've got a lot of we've had a hugely difficult year to do some of this work. It could not have been more difficult, and yet you've carried on and succeeded in the ambitions that you've had. So thank you very much indeed. So we're going to pass on now to item 6, which is the emergency chapter report. And this is going to be presented, I think, Chief Constable, by Assistant Chief Constable Claire Bell. Is that right?
It is, and I believe she's online to do it.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Claire.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. Actually, there is very little that's changed actually since last month's report, given that we've been in lockdown. So if I perhaps just canter through the kind of position for November it really quickly, and then perhaps open it up for any questions.
Yep.
So overall demand has remained fairly consistent through November compared to October. We did see an increase in COVID related logs, as you'd expect with lockdown. I guess that went up about 2.5% compared to October. The volume of 9 calls remained lower than we'd expect for this time of year, and total recorded crime continues to increase, but that is predominantly around some recording work that we're doing. SAC remains with the reductions that I think we discussed last month, both that's burglary, residential and robbery. So they're both sat at a 22% reduction year to date. We've seen there's hate crime is still showing an increase compared to last year, albeit the last 2 months have been lower than they were during the summer. Domestic abuse did increase in November after 2 months of a reduced volume. That would perhaps reflect the lockdown, but also as we move towards Christmas, we know that we see increased reporting of domestic abuse. We continue to see as I say, a volume of calls around COVID. In November, interestingly, we did, and I guess not surprisingly with the lockdown and the more strict restrictions, we saw the highest month for issuing of fixed penalty notices. We issued 666 in November, although 150 of those were for the illegal rave that was in Digbeth on the night that I guess many people will have seen in the news. So we continue to work in partnership around testing sites and vaccination sites, we offer our kind of services around the security arrangements around that, but being very clear around roles and responsibilities with other local resilience forum partners. And we continue to be involved in discussions around lateral flow testing, both as an employer in the region, but also in terms of our policing role. We are awaiting, obviously, tomorrow, the 16th, any news around changes in tiers, which we will wait and obviously be in a position to respond to accordingly if that is the case. And of course, a great deal of our effort at the moment is looking at the concurrent events in relation to the EU exit overlaid with COVID restrictions. So I guess the only point I'd draw out from the report that people will have read previously was there is a section on organisational learning. We have covered previously in previous reports around organisational learning we've covered. This covers a little bit about the operational learning, the command structure that we put in place during wave 1 and the learning that we've taken in relation to how we've managed the second wave. Of course, all this learning is being drawn together on a regular basis, but and will ultimately, I guess, feed into the work that we're now starting to do in relation to the opening of the command suite at Park Lane. So I only draw that out that there's a lot of work that's gone on around business continuity plans, as one would expect in the year that we've been through. I only reference that really because it's not something that we've inserted into the report previously. And I think that's probably it from myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Are there questions or comments, please, to Claire?
Commissioner, it's Jonathan here. If I might come in with just a couple of questions. So thank you, Claire, for that report. Two questions. One about the rollout now of vaccinations and the creation of the large-scale vaccination sites and other sites, and then also the wider use of large testing with the development of large testing facilities. Have either of these generated any particular issues for policing or any concerns relating to crime associated with those sites, or any other sort of public order or other issues would be my first question. And then secondly, noting the changes to the guidance associated with PPE and the advice for officers to wear goggles when in close contact with members of the public. Are we assured that there is an adequate supply of those goggles now that their use will be much greater than previously?
Thank you. If I deal with the goggles first, we've obviously managed to maintain excellent supply chains around the PPE throughout, and goggles is also, we've got a good supply of goggles, so we're not experiencing any issues there at all. In relation to the testing and vaccination sites, we had a little bit of a flurry at one testing site, I think, back in a couple of months ago in relation to a very, very small demonstration from some anti-testing and anti-vaccination people, but that was it. So far we haven't actually. We obviously monitoring this closely, both with through our own intelligence channels and also through partners. It has been a little bit stop-start with the vaccination sites in particular, and we've been working hard to respond to the needs that those setting up the sites need from us from a policing point of view. But at the moment, we haven't experienced any problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Kath, would you like to come in?
Good morning. Thank you very much for your report. My question is about the organisational learning. Could you give us some practical examples of what difference that has made and how things have improved or changed?
So, in relation to the, what I guess it's my turn of phrase, but the operational learning. So in terms of the way that the organisation has operated in relation to the pandemic, there's in relation to business continuity plans would be perhaps be one. So all of those have been reviewed, and we've done some testing around those so that staff are aware, so that departments are aware as to what they're going to do if they lose staff, for example. So business continuity plans were always really focused around buildings. So what happened if the electricity went, or there was a flood in a building, or what have you. Whereas this was about our people. Actually, our estate was fairly stable in many ways, and so we've learned that becomes a lot more important. So what happens if you lose 10%, 20%, 30% of your workforce, and what are some of those critical functions, and how are you going to manage with that? So lots of that work was done through the summer with departments, and we've seen now, when we saw an increase in self-isolation, we've been able to manage and maintain business as usual in circumstances where I think in the past we wouldn't have been able to. So if a team, for example, on response had to isolate 30 people, that would have thrown the whole force. Whereas actually, because we tested a bit, we'd got some trigger plans in place, and we'd thought through what that might look like, we've been able to take a lot more of those disruptions in our stride. Does that make sense? So that's perhaps one around I guess our different approach to a business continuity in particular. We also held a CPD event for the Force executive team around business continuity as well, so that it was understood both its importance as well as what it covered and the span of those plans. So that would be one. I mean, we've got a different command structure in place subtly for Wave 2. We've put a lot more of the areas of work that we focused on in Wave 1 into business as usual processes, and made sure that the infrastructure of the force is therefore all connected. In Wave 1, a lot of it was being run through the COVID command structure, and obviously that's a lot of pressure on a smaller number of individuals. So now it's a lot more connected with tasking processes, with resourcing, and that's connected through predominantly through the gold cell, and as I say, a more simplified structure that we've got in place, which seems to be working well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Are there any other points or questions anyone has to the Assistant Chief Constable? No? Okay. Well,
Commissioner,
yes, Grinda.
Yeah, thank you. Just so on the weekend, we saw a large-scale protest to do with the Indian farmers protest in India. What's the approach of West Midland Police to protesters in the Coventry environment and protests that may take place, and particularly in relation to COVID enforcement measures?
Thank you. We, in the first instance, and this is what we would do with any protest, we would seek to work very closely with the organiser. So that's what we would do with any protest. Now, the regulations and law in relation to protest have been slightly more confusing with the regulations. And so we work through with the organiser where we know that person around what is and isn't possible. We would always encourage an organiser in the current climate to consider other ways that they can make their point. And this is, so does it require people to have to come out onto the streets? Clearly, the regulations need to be considered. And when we're in this period of time, whether it's in lockdown or obviously we're in tier 3, then there is no exemption for protesting. And so therefore, we're very clear with organisers when we're having those discussions about what the expectations are in relation to their role, but also what those that participate are expected to do as well. And like we've said, I mean, we've discussed regularly, haven't we, our approach to enforcement and the 4 E's. Then we're very clear that we still use that approach around, moving through those and explaining to people. But when we've got protests in this current climate, then we are willing to move up to the 4th E of enforcement, where we've got the capability and capacity to do so at the time, and if not, a post post-incident review will take place, and we will consider whether we need to take any action afterwards. And by capability and capacity, I say there are obviously situations where we need to give those commanding the incident on the day the discretion to make the decision as to when it is safe to take action. Large groups of people can sometimes be quite challenging, but we do undertake a post-incident review in all of these circumstances afterwards as well, including the one at the weekend. Thank you.
Okay, Grinda. Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you very much indeed, Assistant Chief Constable. Thank you for the questions as well, and keep up the good work. These are difficult times in which we're working at the moment, and I'm aware, although there's been a small reduction in some areas of criminality, we've seen a huge spike in domestic abuse and reporting of crime, and we're now in October. The levels of reporting of crime are reaching figures we had 15 years ago, and I understand now 1 in 6 of crimes now recorded are domestic abuse or harassment. So the message should be clear to victims of crime, that it will not be tolerated, and do come forward if you are such a victim. And I've been working with some of the excellent organisations. I know Kath Hannon have been doing the same as well, working with those excellent organisations that assist victims through my Victims Commission to help them during the crisis. But we did request some more funding from government. We only got enough to keep business as usual going, and we need about another 3.5 million to give support to those organisations so they can help those very unfortunate victims of this very unpleasant and nasty crime. So I have relaunched our No Excuse for Abuse campaign, particularly on local radio and on some advertising we're doing. I saw something in the Metro newspaper the other day as well. So good work is being done there to try and draw people forward so they're not suffering in silence. So, but thank you for your work you've done in that respect as well, to your Assistant Chief Constable. Okay, we'll then move on to item 7. Item 7 then is the finance update report. I think we've been fairly familiar with this area, so I don't think we need to go through it in detail. But if you could do the highlights for us, to Mark Kenyon, our Chief Finance Officer, and perhaps address the point that was made by somebody at the beginning of this meeting that we were £10 million underspent. You may just want to say something about that again, just so that the public or anyone listening gets some clarity on that point. Mark.
Thank you, Commissioner. So as you said, this is an update report reflecting the latest information in terms of the revenue and capital forecast for expenditure for this financial year. So overall, the revenue position is that we're forecasting just over a £10 million underspend across the force and the PCC's office. This is mainly due to a detailed piece of work that has been undertaken that we've been flagging all year around the Uplift programme, particularly the non-pay aspects of the police Uplift programme. Members will be aware that the Uplift programme is broken down, and the money we get is into 2 separate allocations. There's an amount relating to actual police officer and staff pay, and an element relating to capital. And this is really around sort of making sure that the force has the necessary resources in ways of a number of items, things like equipment, IT&D, mobile devices, vehicles, things like buildings modifications to actually incorporate extra officers. So this detailed piece of work has recognised that this money needs to be carried forward into the new year to help with the current officers we have in situ, and also the future officers that we're going to recruit through the Uplift programme as well. So included in that £10.3 million underspend, there's actually an overspend relating to COVID. The previous report introduced by Assistant Chief Constable set out that the COVID expenditure, after taking account of all the refunds that we've received from government, is likely to cost the force around £6 million since March 2020, and that being around a £5 million this year, because £1 million related to the previous year as well. So just moving on to capital quickly, there's an underspend on the capital programme, and this is really around COVID and the estates programme in terms of the sort of rephasing of the expenditure into the new year. Paragraph 8 of the report sets out the detailed variances across the police force. I won't go into them in detail, but they're quite clearly over the different types of expenditure. It's references to things like underspends in transport costs due to COVID, and also the free fuel that we were provided during the year. And also there's some sort of minor underspends as well relating to demand related issues, things like interpreters. So that paragraph there includes, again, references the underspending in the Uplift programme as well. So for the first time in terms of the reporting, this report includes a forecast for the counter-terrorism unit. And members will be aware we get a specific grant for counter-terrorism from the Home Office, and this report sets out what the likely expenditure is in that area, and also the ROCU is included in the report as well in terms of West Midlands capabilities as well. Report also includes reserves as well, the reserves position forecast for the end of this financial year. So those are the main highlights, Commissioner. Thank you very much and welcome any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Mark, and thank you for covering that item about the so-called underspend. The other issue, of course, will be the precept, and again that was referenced in the early part of the meeting. I mean, it is the government has an expectation within our budget that we put up the precept by £15 for a Band D property, and I'm minded to do that. We will be out for consultation, but we're asking people their views on that. We will still be, even with £15, we'll still be the second lowest in the country with the precept, and £60–70 lower than neighbourhood places like Warwickshire, whose Band D precept is very much higher than ours. But that will be a matter for consultation and listening to what people have to say first. Are there any other comments or questions to Mark? No? Okay. Well, Mark, thank you very much indeed and for the work you've been doing this. And I appreciate that it's been a real challenge this year. COVID has brought challenge in every area of our business. And I noticed that we have received some extra funding from government, but we're still about a net £6 million short on what we've spent. The net expenditure that we've made is still not insubstantial, and it's probably a good job, although our reserves aren't high, it's a good job that we had some in reserve to actually cover this. And I understand one or two other forces are in quite challenging positions, or even having to face potential borrowing to cover their costs. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We now come on to item 8, which is the Coventry City of Culture. And I'm now going to hand over the chair to my deputy, Wahid Salim. Wahid, would you like to chair the meeting for the next 2 items, please?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to ACC Chris Todd, who is joining us to present this report, and also take this opportunity to congratulate you on your temporary promotion, Chris. I think this is your first meeting coming to the board in that rank. So I'll hand over to you, Chris, to present the report, and then I'll ask for questions.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me well enough in this room. Excellent, good. So I'm joined this morning by Chief Superintendent Mike O'Hara. So briefing on this Coventry City of Culture. Report has been submitted, which you'll have had the opportunity, hopefully, to see in advance. A reminder that the year for the City of Culture at Coventry commences in May 21. The report, it covers 12 objectives you'll see within there. I won't go through them all in detail, but I'll just highlight the 2 main areas really, which we can be broken down into. The first is around testing and exercising and our preparedness to deliver the safe City of Culture. in 2021. And the second area really is around the community benefits that will bring, the opportunities and the legacy that we hope that will be delivered through this. So looking first of all at the testing and exercising and our preparedness, we have a gold, silver, bronze structure in place. I am the gold commander and Mike is the silver commander, so we're both here today to answer any questions. Supporting that in terms of preparedness, there is a coordination, readiness and operational delivery team which sits within that structure and works alongside the trust to ensure that we are ready. Some of the threats and risks that they've been assessing and testing against and ensuring that we are prepared for, they cover such areas as some of the real high-end threats which we hope never to have to deal with, but to ensure that we are prepared if we need to, such as marauding terrorist attacks, physical mitigation and such like around the city that is required in advance of the events, public safety issues, some key work with partners that enables us to do as well, such as working with Coventry University, who have some good modules and their master's courses supporting events around crowded places. Lots of tabletop exercising, which has been done in advance with partners, looking at issues such as mass evacuations of multiple events across the city, building those relationships with the counter-terrorist unit, with the Commonwealth Games team as well, which is running in parallel, developing for that event to come the year after, and ensuring that we're sharing learning and understanding from each other, picking up on national issues and events such as the Kerslake report into the Manchester arena, and taking any learning we can from that. So that's all going on as we speak, really, and putting us in a good state of readiness. Then coming on to what we'll actually achieve through the year's worth of events. The police team is embedded with the Coventry City of Culture Trust. And we have a team that specifically looks at this area, which has one of the longest names you can imagine. It's the Community Engagement, Partnership Development, Problem Solving and Evaluation team. It just trips off the tongue. But ultimately, they're looking at the community opportunities and the legacy, which we hope will come from our engagement in this, and all our partners involved in this will obviously be hoping for the same. So the vision really is to deliver the City of Culture over that year, to enhance the West Midlands Police Services through this opportunity, to bring in the whole force to learn from this and to benefit from this, and to use the positive impact that this opportunity brings to the city to influence more widely across the whole of the force and across our communities. We want to bring other departments in, we want to bring other neighbourhood teams in, get involved in delivering the City of Culture and take that learning away so that all the communities across the West Midlands will benefit from this. Obviously it will be centred on Coventry, but it should be something that we're all proud to be involved with, particularly the opportunities it provides for young people, the pathways that we can develop, the energy that it will bring to the region, and as I say, the learning that we can take from this into the Commonwealth Games events to come. Opportunities for music, arts, creativity, technology, events organisation, all of these things that can create positive pathways for people in communities through this year, and the opportunities that the City of Culture will bring. The detail, as I say, is within the report. The 12 objectives are highlighted there, but myself and most importantly Mike, who's living and breathing this on a daily basis in Coventry, are here to answer any questions we can assist with.
Thank you very much, ACC, and welcome to Chief Inspector Mike O'Hara as well. Chief Superintendent, I do apologise, just demoted you. Sorry, Mike. Chief Superintendent Mike O'Hara as well. Is there any questions any board members wish to ask? Kath, is that you're indicating? Yeah, go on, Kath.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much all. Both myself and Wahid have got some oversight of the developments, particularly of the Heritage Centre for the City of Culture. And just to say now, there's some real synergy between all the different groups about making this happen. And just a question about what else needs to be done to try and drive forward particularly the pop-up museum over in Coventry? And is there anybody else that we need to engage with to make it pop-up?
Okay, thank you for the question. Chief Superintendent?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Great stuff. So within the report, you can see that there are a number of opportunities that we're exploring around the museum and the broader heritage of the force. I'm happy at the moment that we're working very closely with the relevant directors within the local authority and exploring estate opportunities. We're also working closely with Claire Kirbishley and the demand champions around what that would look like for us, because clearly there are some liability challenges and costs that we'll work through. But I'm confident at this stage, based on the discussions we've had with the relevant directors within the City Council and the Business Improvement District, along with the City of Culture Trust, that the pop-up museum doesn't feel like we'll have any blockers. And I'm happy we'll be able to work through those. So at the moment, I'm happy we'll get the pop-up museum developed. It will be impactful and it will support our heritage work alongside the City of Culture.
That's great, Mike. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If there's no other questions, ICC Chris Todd, Chief Superintendent Mike O'Hara, thank you very much for presenting that report. I'm very pleased that I'm involved in the City of Culture's programme board, and it'd be great if you could also extend our thanks to Helen Kirkman, who is leading some of the operational work. We have a regular dialogue and contact with her, and I'm also really pleased that the Police Crime Commissioner was able to find £106,000 to support the legacy programmes of the Coventry City of Culture. This is an important programme, not only for the city of Coventry, but also for the whole of the region. And we're very pleased to be involved and engaged in that programme and to support the city. So thank you very much. And on that note, I will then move on to the next agenda item, which is EU exit. Is it ACC Crystal, are you going to lead off on this? And I know Chief Superintendent Rich Baker has joined us as well. So Chris, do you want to head off on this?
Yes, thank you. So back to myself, and this time I'm joined by Lee Warmby, who will assist with this particular subject matter. So EU exit and our considerations around this. Again, the report has been presented to the board, which hopefully you'll have had the time to read or will be available for you afterwards. But again, I would focus on two key areas really to highlight. Firstly, it's the impact that we are prepared for around the use of international investigative tools. And secondly, is the impact on infrastructure and communities that we may expect and certainly need to be prepared for. So firstly, looking at international tools, our primary response to this is through the ICCC, which is the International Crime Coordination Centre. So Chief Superintendent Rich Baker, who is our head of ROCU, Regional Organised Crime Unit, leads on this and is supported by Sergeant Kate Jeffries within the ICC, our single point of contact there. This is the mechanism by which we seek to ensure that we are prepared for any eventuality that may arise and the impact that might have on our access to current international investigative tools. So the headlines really details within the report, as I say, but how I would sum that up is that we could potentially lose some of our capability in the event of a non-negotiated outcome, but the ICC provides mitigation to that risk. And we, of course, will be able to revert to the Interpol processes that we've known and trusted from old, and this will allow us to continue with any necessary enforcement. It just may mean that some of the processes in the short term at least will be a little bit more clunky and a little slower than we've been used to, but that's in the event of a non-negotiated outcome. And of course we wait to see if there will be a negotiated outcome, or in other words, a deal. What is in West Midlands Police's gift, because there is still some uncertainty, as we know negotiations continue, well, that is to ensure that the ICC contribution is fully prepared. And we are cracking on with that and doing as much as we possibly can. And to give you some assurance of that, for example, we could potentially lose the Schengen Information Systems capability. And so we have made sure that all of our back records have been converted to Interpol notices, ready to go. We've ensured that the continued professional development of our staff is ongoing, so that our people know how to work with the Interpol notices, etc. We are ensuring that our integrated offender management teams are stood up, ready to receive any international demands that would have gone through the European systems and processes previously. We're cooperating and working closely with the NCA, who have an international liaison officer network, which gives us access direct to law enforcement in the respective countries. And one of the things that we're encouraging all our staff involved in investigations is to plan ahead, and to be on the front foot with our investigations, in the knowledge that some of the Interpol processes might be slightly slower, so we need to get onto those as soon as we possibly can, and to start that now, and to engage early with the Crown Prosecution Service if we think that international letters of request are required for overseas investigations. So there's a lot that we can do, and a lot that we are doing to ensure that we mitigate any risk that comes from a reduction in our access to those international investigative tools. And then secondly, on the impact on infrastructure and communities, there's a great deal of national and local planning that's been going on. We test and we prepare for what we call reasonable worst case scenarios. So we're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, effectively. So this includes a number of tabletop exercises, and in addition to the exercising against particular threats in a similar way as I described around City of Culture for Coventry, we've also had some peer reviews conducted. So last week, a number of us sat down with senior leaders from South Wales Police and the Metropolitan Police, and we tested each other's preparedness, and sought to learn from each other to make sure that we're not missing anything at all. We have our local resilience forum in place, which I'm the vice chair of, and we have a strategic coordination group which has been stood up across the region and the neighbouring region with Warwickshire, to ensure that we're working effectively with all our partners, and that includes the MHCLG at government level as well. So what do we know so far? Well, we know that there will be an inland border facility in the Birmingham area, so that will be dealing with traffic outbound destined for Kent. There will be an opportunity for heavy goods vehicles to stop at a facility in Birmingham to clear customs effectively, to speed up the transition once they reach the ports. So we're preparing for that with partners, and the potential increase in traffic that we can see from that. And we have received some mutual aid requests, so we know that we will need to send some officers down to Kent again in order to assist with traffic at the border on the 1st of January. We're considering and preparing for changes around intelligence and potential impacts on hate crime and protest which might come from this, and we're doing that by daily scanning and reporting. Pleased to say there's nothing specific as yet, but we're not complacent about that, and we will continue to scan and seek intelligence and information. In terms of protest, there's a lot of learning that's been developed over the last year or so, certainly during the pandemic period, that we can draw upon should we need to. And of course, we've experienced previous increases in hate crime around significant events, and we will seek to monitor that. Again, nothing is being evidenced at this particular moment in time, but we are prepared if we need to be. My plea really would be, as I've mentioned in my recent blog internally to staff, is to seek the views of our community. So we can prepare for all of these things, and we hope we're doing that in the most effective way, but we're not complacent, and we want to understand exactly what our communities expect and require from West Midlands Police, so that we can adopt our policing stance appropriately. But the detail, as I say, is within that report, and myself as the Gold Commander for this, and Lee as the Silver Commander are here and available for any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, AC Todd, for that comprehensive report. I'll invite the Police Crime Commissioner to ask the first question, David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wahid. From a layman's point of view, in as much as you know about what a deal would look like, can you give for the ordinary man and woman in the street, what will be the difference in the way that you can tackle international criminals? People are traveling over the borders between this country and mainland Europe. And could you also give a flavour of how that would be different if there was a no deal?
Certainly, Commissioner, as much as I can. So at the moment, we draw some understanding, as you'd expect from the media reporting, and there are suggestions that the issues that affect international investigation tools are within some of the less contentious areas. So I think the media are reporting on 3 key points which don't impact these investigative tools. So that gives us some hope that a deal may come about, and a non-negotiated outcome, which will ensure that we do retain some access to these tools, in which case it will be business as usual. But the points that I highlighted earlier on are the contingencies for the outcome that we have to prepare for, just in case. As I say, we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But if there is a non-negotiated outcome, i.e. no deal, then we would lose access to those EU tools. And in effect, it would mean that some of our processes would be slower. So some of the arrangements to check systems internationally, rather than tapping direct into a shared system, we would have to send requests direct to those member states and ask them to send the information back. So it would reduce the turnaround time of those requests. It would be slightly slower.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oops, sorry, Tom was next, and then Kath. Tom.
Thank you, Deputy. Obviously, a lot of commentators are talking about the risk of mass unemployment as a result of COVID-19, and a lot are similarly saying if there's a no-deal Brexit, that could also result in even more unemployment. And so there could be a risk that leads to social upheaval and maybe public disorder issues, not just protests, but maybe some of the kind of things we saw in 2011. Are your scenario testing and other police forces scenario testing looking at these kinds of worst case scenarios as well?
Yes, so Cleve Warmby speaking. So we've ran probably 5 or 6 tabletops now, and they include probably every eventuality which is listed in the reasonable worst case scenarios document, which as Mr. Todd has described there, is a national document which has then been reflected locally through our local resilience forum to represent local issues. Those sorts of issues are included in that, and we have tested our response, and it's really hard to gain any firm information on terms of what that might look like. But in terms of community cohesion, supply chain issues, maybe disruptions to the food supplies, all of those things have been considered. And to the best of our ability, working through all of the partners and stakeholders you'd expect through local authorities, social care, children's services, we have probably addressed the issues that may arise. But it is really tough to put any meat on the bones to any of those things. As I say, it's all, at the moment, reasonable worst case scenario and assumptions, but we think we have plans in place to address those through our existing partnership structures. So if that provides the reassurance you're after, then yes, I think we have tested those things.
Yeah, thank you. It is good to know that you are thinking about that, because so many commentators are raising it as a realistic concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Kath and then Gurinder, if I can just plead to ask the questioners and the answers, if you could keep it brief, that'd be really helpful. So, Kath.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. And my question is about PRUM, the exchange of intelligence DNA. It's just to get an understanding of how many requests that have come into the West Midlands, how they've been responded to, and also some reassurance to our communities that all those requests, despite what's going on with Brexit, etc., will be responded to promptly and vigorously.
Thank you.
Yes, so PRUM is the DNA exchange arrangement that we have with EU member states. That is one of the tools which would be problematic if we lost access to that. But we would simply address each case on a case-by-case basis and make the necessary requests for that exchange via Interpol. So it would be slower, there's no doubt about that, but we would have an opportunity to still engage with the relevant member states and seek the exchange of that the DNA information. And we would, as I say, we would seek to do that as effectively and efficiently as we possibly can and make best use of the ICCC to achieve that. So we are prepared for that. We are planning for that. We do know how to go about that in the event that we did lose access to that tool. But as I say, we hope that that will be one that we do retain.
Thank you. Kath?
And just in respect of the number of requests or responses that we've sent aboard, do you have an idea what the figures might be?
I'm afraid I don't have that information to hand. I can perhaps feed that in separately.
I think Chief Superintendent Baker wants to come in. Richard, do you want to come in?
Yeah, my understanding is we're currently at about 500. So nationally, we've had about 12,000 requests or hits that have come back across the UK. We're sitting at about 5% of that in total, which is pretty average. To be fair, we often carry about 5% of the hits for most of these types of European tools. So it's sitting at somewhere between 400 and 500 at the moment.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're going to move to the next question. Gurinder?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. My question was in a similar vein, and also picking up from what David said earlier about the understanding of this from an ordinary person perspective, is just to understand the scale or the volume on each of these areas. So you picked up on the prompt there, but on the other areas as well. What kind of impact does the ordinary citizen expect from the restrictions that may take place?
I'll probably come back to Rich on that one, who has the closer access to the ICCC. Rich, are you able to comment?
Yes, so I suppose that the biggest area that we will get impacted on is on the use of SIS2, where we have to revert to Interpol notices. We're doing a huge amount of work with SCID and PPU at the moment, who are our biggest users of those, to back record convert the number of current SIS2 requests that we've got on the system into Interpol notices. But of course, then we've got to convert that into business as usual in the event of a non-negotiated outcome on the 31st of December. So all of that training is ongoing. European arrest warrants is another area that carries some obviously threat, risk and harm to it. We have approximately 100 European arrest warrants coming into the West Midlands police area at any particular time. MPU commanders, through their offender management teams, are putting some more dedicated resource into this in preparation for a non-negotiated outcome. So we are seeing an increase in arrests of European arrest warrants at the moment. But certainly they're the two main areas where we're going to see the biggest impact and the biggest changes occurring for us.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. There is a point from Kath on the chat. If we could just take that outside of the meeting, that'd be really helpful, Rich. On that point, I'd just like to thank ACC Todd, Chief Superintendent Lee Wormley, and Chief Superintendent Baker for presenting the report and answering the questions. And on that point, I'll hand over to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Wahid. Just one final comment to me. It would appear to me that a no-deal Brexit will have a sort of major impact on policing, and we're relying so heavily on the swift exchange of data, and that it does look, even with a deal, it looks as if that might be affected. And these are helping us apprehend some of the vilest people that we have in this country and going over our borders. And I think it would be very perverse, would it not, as a result of taking back control, we actually had less control over the movement of criminals and rapists and others, and it was easier for them to cross borders with impunity. I'm also dismayed that really, as a time when we're dealing with rising crime from COVID and helping out with Kent as well, that we'll have potentially fewer officers to deal with some of our domestic issues. I have written in my capacity as the chair of the CT Collaboration Board, Counter-Terrorism Collaboration Board, to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary some weeks ago, asking for measures to be in place or to inform us. No response have I received as yet. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Assistant Chief Constable, for your thoroughness and care which you've given the report. So we come now on to the last major item on the agenda, which is the Chief Constable update. Chief Constable, have you some updates for us, please?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll be able to deal with them all in the public side of the agenda. There's just three areas I wanted to touch on. The first was, and I think you did cover this at the start of the meeting, was some of the recognition the force has received over the last couple of weeks from external awards. So obviously, you talked about the award where the force came second in the UK's most inclusive employers list. I have to say you are completely correct. I'm incredibly proud of that position. I think it would be absolutely right to pay credit to the staff in our diversity and inclusion unit led by Anthony Burnett, who do all the work clearly to provide the evidence. But of course, as with all these things, if you don't have the evidence, you can't demonstrate your ability to achieve this. And I think we were incredibly pleased to appear so high up in the list. Making the top 50 is quite an achievement in its own right. And we were particularly pleased, I think, to see how high the fire service in the West Midlands came. They came 5th. The combined authority, I think, was in the top 20. The orthopaedic hospital was there and Midland Heart was there. So there was a very strong representation in the region. But nonetheless, that position is good for us. I think it gives us a good basis to continue to build on, because nobody would pretend for a moment that that journey is complete. There is still a lot of work we need to do around improving our diversity and inclusion. The events over the summer with the Black Lives Matter demonstration, always make the point that policing legitimacy is a constant battle we have to strive. We're never quite done, and there is more to be done. But certainly, it's a good reward for the work so far, and we will continue that work. I also ought to say there have been some very good accolades for our IT and digital. So they have won 2 major international awards for the work they have done, particularly around areas. The one that I think is particularly significant is the work around cloud-based work. I describe IT in the force as a little bit like an iceberg. We spend all our time discussing the things we can see at the tip. And what we don't realise is we can't do these incredible things without actually all that goes on below the waterline. And the work the force has done with accessing using cloud, it's exciting to see us beat major organisations like the NHS with the achievements. So again, full credit to Helen Davis and her staff. Our IT and digital capability has transformed over the last 5 years as a result of the programme of change the force has been running, and they deserve full credit for the brilliant work they're doing. So those accolades were very pleasant, but as always, they spur you on to do more, and we certainly shan't be resting on our laurels with those. The second area I wanted to talk about was to just pick up upon the COVID restrictions, and clearly what will be a very challenging seasonal period into the new year. We often find ourselves publicising from policing the examples where we have had to carry out enforcement activity because of breaches of the COVID regulations, and they have ranged from raves, they've ranged to licensed premises cheating, but at the same time, and most importantly of all, I think we need to recognise the public remain outstanding in the work that they are doing. I notice particularly as I go out and about just how the culture of mask wearing is moving in the right direction, that more and more people are showing the commitment, that actually I know even from conversations with the staff in the force, how people are being very thoughtful about the opportunity to mix at Christmas. And that's all encouraging, because it was wonderful to see the eyes of the world turn on Coventry the other day with the first vaccinations. And I think the light is there at the end of the tunnel for this. And so I'd really urge, as we go through the seasonal period, that people, of course, will want to celebrate this time We also need to recognise that other faiths have also had to endure restrictions. Particularly, we saw this with Eid al-Adha. We've seen it with Diwali. We're seeing it with the Jewish community at the moment, and managing all the challenges that coming together at moments of faith do. And I continue to put my trust in the public of the West Midlands that they are consistently and overwhelmingly doing the right thing, and policing will be there to police around the edges. But we certainly will be doing that, and particularly our attention around large gatherings in breach of the rules and licensed premises that will seek to step outside the rules. We will certainly not let people cheat and disadvantage existing businesses. But let's hope for a enjoyable, different and peaceful Christmas with a very positive 2021 coming forward. The final area was just really the broader social contribution the force is making at this time. We have, I think, instigated a broader range of charitable activity this year in West Midlands Police. Across the force, we are doing considerable amount of collections for food banks at the moment, and I'd like to thank particularly the staff who've gone the extra mile to organise that. We have been delivering toys and foodstuffs to each of the areas and local authorities. We've also been raising some funding. We had a slightly more exciting Christmas jumper day on Friday, but actually, most importantly, we've also allowed our staff that are working in areas that are not quite as under operational pressure to, we give them a number of hours, about a day or so, to assist local charitable organisations that are helping people in need. And so we've had a few people who we can find that time for, who've been stepping out and stepping up to do a little bit more than normal. And I'd like to pass thanks to staff who have really been putting the public first during this period, not just in the policing work they're doing, their charitable giving, and also their charitable hours that they've been contributing to help the public. I think that completes the broad report, Commissioner. As always, I'd wish members of the board and yourselves a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we will hopefully look forward to another exciting but slightly more normal year in 2021.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Are there any points or questions to the Chief? Right, we'll just go into what is the very last item, which is the work plan. Chief Executive, is there anything you want to say about the work plan?
Just noting, sir, that at the meeting in January, we are considering our duty to have had regard to the strategic policing requirement. The government recently undertook a review of the SPR. We don't know the outcome of that yet, but one of the areas that the review looked at was the extent to which police and crime commissioners could demonstrate that they were fulfilling, and chief constables indeed could demonstrate they were fulfilling the have regard duty. The report that we take at the next meeting is part of that mechanism that we do to show in the West Midlands that we play our part appropriately in the policing response to national threats, and also where there are issues relating to that response that we can highlight them and respond to them appropriately.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jardine. Are there any questions or points on that? No? Okay. Well, if that's the case, Chief Constable, can I thank you on behalf of this board and for the people of the West Midlands for the work that you have been doing over this year. This has been astonishingly difficult for us all in all sectors of life, but I think for police, the adaptability that you've shown, the ability to flex and change, and the way that you've dealt with the COVID incidents and people with explaining and engaging with people, I think has been really quite outstanding. And so thank you to you and to all your force. And we wish everyone has a very happy Christmas. And like you, I'm hoping the next year will be slightly less eventful in terms of pandemics, and we can get down to business as usual. But that will remain to be seen. And I just hope that what happens over Christmas doesn't actually enhance the problems we're having with the pandemic. So if there is no other business, thank you all very much indeed. And with our next meeting, as the Chief Executive just said, is on the 19th of January. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.